A scream tore through the dining hall. A young woman lunged across the long table, sleeve dragging through candle flame. Her hand struck a silver spoon, knocking it clean out of a man's grip. Soup splashed across white linen. A guard's sword scraped free of its scabbard. Another seized her by the hair and yanked her backward to the floor. Her knees hit stone. Blood beaded on her lip. Nobody breathed. The man at the head of the table sat frozen, spoon hovering empty in midair, dark broth running down his sleeve. He looked at her. She looked at him. And then, with a blade resting against her neck, she said one word: poison. Her name was Mira, a scullery maid in the lowest corner of the house. What did a girl who scrubbed kettles know that 12 guards and a steward did not? Stay with me on this one. The man whose life she had just saved was Duke Aldrich von Reinhardt, master of this house, master of the lands that stretched from the river to the eastern forest. A man who answered to no one but the king himself. And the girl pinned to the floor at his feet was no one. A scullery maid, hired 6 months ago. She washed pots. She scrubbed floors. She emptied chamber pots before dawn and again after dusk. Most of the household did not know her name. Some did not know she existed. The Duke held up one hand. The guard pressing the blade to her throat hesitated. Let her speak. The guard did not move. Let her speak. This time it was not a request. The blade lifted half an inch. Mira swallowed. She did not raise her head from the stone. She had been trained, in her old life, that a servant never met the eye of a man like Aldrich von Reinhardt unless he commanded it. She said it again, softer. Poison, your grace. In the broth. I beg you to believe me. The Duke did not answer at once. He looked down at the silver spoon now lying on the linen. He looked at the bowl in front of him. The bowl that had been carried in by his own steward, ladled by his own cook, tasted by his own taster. 3 men had handled that bowl. 3 men whose lives depended on the food being clean. You understand, he said very quietly, what you are accusing them of. Yes, your grace. And you understand what happens to a maid who lies to her master. Yes, your grace. The Duke was a tall man, broad through the shoulders, 46 years old. The kind of man who had survived 2 wars and 3 uprisings and a brother who had once tried to put a knife in his back at a hunting party. He had not survived all of that by ignoring strange things. A girl willing to die for a warning. That was a strange thing. He stood. He walked the length of the table, slow, deliberate, and the boots of every guard in the room shifted as he moved. He stopped beside the steward. The steward, Heinrich, the man who had served the family for 30 years. The man who had carried the bowl in his own hands. Heinrich, your grace. Eat. The word landed like a stone in a still pond. Heinrich's face went the color of candle wax. His mouth opened. Closed. It opened again. Your grace, surely a girl. A scullery girl. You cannot mean. Eat. The Duke lifted the spoon himself. He filled it from the bowl. He held it out. Heinrich did not take it. 3 heartbeats. 4. 5. And then Heinrich began to weep. That was the moment everything in the dining hall changed. The guards stopped looking at Mira. They looked at Heinrich. The cook, who had been brought in from the kitchen at the sound of the scream, sank slowly to one knee. The taster, a thin man called Otto, was already trying to back toward the door. The Duke set the spoon down. Take them, he said. All 3. Hold them separately. No conversation. No water. No food they did not bring themselves. The guards moved. There was a brief scuffle. Otto tried to run. He did not get far. When the dining hall was empty of everyone but the Duke, Mira, and 2 guards, Aldrich von Reinhardt walked back to where the girl still knelt with her cheek to the stone. Stand up, she tried. Her legs did not hold her. She put a hand on the leg of the table and pulled herself half upright. He looked at her for a long moment. Up close, She was younger than he had expected. 19, maybe 20. Hair the color of wet straw. A thin face. Eyes that did not look like the eyes of a girl who scrubbed pots for a living. "How did you know?" She did not answer. "Girl, how did you know it was poison?" Her voice was so quiet he had to lean down to hear her. "Because I have smelled it before, Your Grace. In a kitchen very far from here. The night my father died." He took her not to a kitchen and not to a cell, but to his own study, 3 flights above the dining hall. And that alone told Mira how strange this night was going to be. Servants did not enter the study. Even the steward had only crossed its threshold twice in a year. He pointed to a chair. She did not sit. "Sit." She sat. The chair was deep and lined with silk, and her dress was wet from the soup she had spilled and from her own sweat, and the silk darkened beneath her. She did not move. "Your father." "Yes, Your Grace." "An apothecary." "A master, Your Grace." He had served 3 noble houses in his life. He read 4 languages. He kept gardens. He knew the names of things most physicians had forgotten. "Where?" 2 duchies east of here, in the city of Marin. A house called Velbrant. The Duke's expression did not change, but Mira had grown up watching faces, and she saw something move behind his eyes when she said the name. He knew the house. "And your father died." 6 years ago, Your Grace. I was 13. "How?" He found a jar in the still room that did not belong. A jar of dried root. He recognized it. It was windflower, crushed into powder, mixed with dried mint to hide the smell. He went to the master of the house. He warned him. "By morning my father was dead in his bed. My mother was told he had taken his own life. The jar was gone. The still room was clean. And the man who killed him sat at breakfast the next day." The Duke leaned forward. "And you smelled windflower tonight." "In the broth, Your Grace. Crushed in mint." "The same. Exactly the same." He sat back. He was silent a long time. "Where have you been since you were 13? "Many places, Your Grace. None of them long." "And you came to my house 6 months ago." "Yes, Your Grace." "Why?" She did not answer. "Why this house, girl? Of all the houses in this country." She raised her eyes for the first time. "Not all the way. Just enough. Because I heard, Your Grace, in a tavern 2 years ago, that the master of Velbrant had begun to send letters. To a man in the West. A man with land and soldiers and an old grudge against the king." The Duke was very still. "That man being me." "Yes, Your Grace." "And you came here to watch, to listen, to see if the jar would come west. You came to my house to wait for a poisoning." "I came to your house to prevent one, Your Grace." The Duke stood. He walked to the window. He looked out at the dark courtyard. For a long time he said nothing. When he turned, his voice was different. "Heinrich." "He carried the bowl, Your Grace. But he is not the source. He is afraid of someone. Make him more afraid of you. You presume to instruct me." "I beg your pardon, Your Grace." He almost smiled. "Almost. Stay here. Do not leave this room." He went down. He went to the cellar. He went to Heinrich. What happened in that cellar was not a thing the house spoke of afterward. The Duke did not raise his voice. He did not raise his hand. He sat in a chair across from a weeping steward, and he simply waited. And after an hour Heinrich began to talk. The name Heinrich gave was a name the Duke had been expecting and dreading in equal measure. Lord Corvin, the Duke's own cousin. The man who would inherit if Aldrich von Reinhardt died before his son came of age. A man the Duke had broken bread with at Easter not 2 months past. Heinrich gave dates. Heinrich gave the name of a courier. Heinrich gave the name of the apothecary in the East who had sold the jar. By midnight the Duke had the proof. By the first hour after midnight he had given the orders. Riders went out into the dark. Lord Corvin's estate was 3 days' ride. Before he could be warned, before he could run, men would already be at his gate. The Duke returned to his study. Mira had not moved from the chair. She had fallen asleep sitting upright, her hands folded in her lap the way a child folds them when she has been told to be still. He stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment. Then he set a heavy purse on the desk beside her. Gold. More gold than a scullery maid would see in 3 lifetimes. He poured himself a glass of wine. He sat by the fire. He breathed out slow. It was done. The poisoner was named. The cousin would be in chains by week's end. The bowl had been emptied into the river. Heinrich was in irons. Otto was in irons. The cook would hang or be banished, depending on what she knew. For the first time since the scream in the dining hall, Duke Aldrich von Reinhardt allowed his shoulders to drop. He set the wineglass on the small table beside him. He closed his eyes. The fire crackled. Somewhere far down the hall a clock chimed 2. He thought, it is over. He was wrong. Myra's eyes opened. She did not know what woke her. Not the fire. Not the clock. Something smaller. Something in the air. She turned her head. The Duke had fallen asleep in his chair by the fire. His wineglass sat on the small table beside him. Half empty. The wine was very dark. The cup was silver. She stood. Quietly, she crossed the room. She picked up the cup. She did not need to bring it to her face. She could smell it from a foot away. Not windflower this time. Something worse. She stood there for 1 full second holding the silver cup, and in that second she understood 3 things at once. The first was that the dinner had been a feint. The second was that the cousin had been a tool. The third, and this was the one that made her hands shake, was that whoever had planned this had planned it knowing the Duke would survive the broth. They had wanted him to survive the broth. They had wanted him to feel safe. They had wanted him to pour himself a glass of wine. She set the cup down. She turned. The Duke was waking, slowly, the way a tired man wakes by a warm fire. Your Grace. Your Grace. Get up. He opened his eyes. Get up. Walk. Do not sit. Do not drink. Walk. He sat forward. He was not a slow man, even half asleep. He saw her face. He saw the cup in her hand. How much did I drink? 2 swallows, Your Grace. Maybe 3. He stood. He swayed. He caught himself on the back of the chair. What is it? I do not know the name. I know the smell. My father had a name for it. He called it the 7 days. Because that is how long it takes. The Duke's face changed. 7 days to kill. 7 days to kill, Your Grace. Slowly. Looks like a fever. Looks like a bad heart. Nobody asks questions. He was very still. That is not a poison a cousin in the East buys from an apothecary, Your Grace. That is a poison made by one man in this kingdom. One. He served the old king. And when the old king died, the new king kept him. The Duke sat down. Not in the chair by the fire. He sat down on the floor. Slowly. Like a man whose legs had simply stopped agreeing to hold him. You are telling me. I am telling you, Your Grace, that I do not believe your cousin sent the wine. He looked at her. Then who? She did not answer, because what she was about to say was not a thing a scullery maid said to a duke. It was not a thing a duke said out loud in his own house. It was the kind of sentence that, once spoken, could not be put back. The Duke saw it in her face. Say it. Your Grace. Say it, girl. She said it. The crown. The Duke laughed. It was not a real laugh. It was the laugh of a man whose mind has just been handed something it cannot hold. You are telling me the king tried to kill me. No, Your Grace. I am telling you that the man who makes that poison still lives in the king's house. And I am telling you that he does not make it for amusement. He makes it when he is asked. Asked by whom? That is the question, Your Grace. That has always been the question. The Duke stood, and this time he stayed standing. My father, he said, not to her, to himself. My father died of a sudden fever. He was 51 and strong as a bull. They said the fever took him in a week. Yes, your grace. My uncle Bernhard, the chancellor. 3 years ago. They said it was his heart. Yes, your grace. Lord Albrecht of Wesson. 2 winters ago. Yes, your grace. How many? 7 that I know of, your grace. You would be the 7th. The Duke closed his eyes. He stood by the fire and he closed his eyes, and Mira saw his shoulders move once, hard, as if something heavy had landed on them from above. When he opened his eyes again, he was a different man. Mira had seen this before. She had seen it once in her father, the night before he died. The moment a quiet man understands that quiet will no longer keep him alive. Now look, if you're still with me on this, and I know it just took a hard turn, hit that subscribe button and stay for the rest. Because what these two did next changed the kingdom, and Mira didn't walk out of it the way she walked in. Let's keep going. How long have you known this? He said. 2 years, your grace. And you came to my house 6 months ago. Yes, your grace. Why mine? Of the 7. Because the others were already dead. You were the only one left I could still reach. He looked at her for a long time. Then he sat down at his desk. He pulled out a sheet of paper. He picked up a pen. Send for the captain of the guard, he said. Wake the riders. I want every road from this house watched by dawn. I want a man inside every kitchen in this castle. I want no food and no drink to pass any door in this house until I say so. Yes, your grace. And Mira. She had not heard her own name spoken aloud in this room. It struck her like a small cold thing against the back of her neck. Yes, your grace. You are not a scullery maid anymore. They rode east at dawn. 12 men. 3 carts. A duke in plain wool with his face hidden under a hood. And in the second cart, dressed as a kitchen woman with a basket on her lap, a girl named Mira who had not slept in 2 days. The duke had not gone to the king. Not yet. He had sent no message. He had told no one in his house except the captain of the guard, because he understood what Mira had taught him without her saying it. If the poison came from the king's house, the moment he warned the king's house would know. So he did not warn the king. He went to find the man who made the poison. The man's name was Master Lautner. He lived in a narrow stone tower at the back of the royal physician's garden, in a city 3 days' ride from the duchy. He was 81 years old. He had outlived 2 kings and the wife of a third. He kept doves. He kept cats. And in a locked room at the top of his tower he kept jars. They came at him in the 2nd hour after midnight. The duke went in alone except for Mira and 2 men. The rest of the guards held the bottom of the tower and the garden gate. There was a back stair the captain had paid a gardener to describe. There was a side door that opened only from the inside. The captain's men had a way of opening doors that opened only from the inside. Lautner was not asleep. He was at a long wooden table grinding something pale in a stone mortar. He did not look surprised to see them. He looked, in fact, like a man who had been expecting visitors for a very long time. Your Grace, he said. He did not stand. Master Lautner, you are not dead. No. The old man set the pestle down. Then it was the 7 days, was it? You did not finish the cup. I did not finish the cup. Lautner nodded slowly. He looked at Mira, standing in the doorway, basket still in her hand. His eyes paused on her, and Mira saw something pass through them. Not surprise. Recognition. You look like your father, he said. Mira did not breathe. Yes, he said. I knew him. A good man. A better nose than mine by the end. He came too close. They sent me a letter. I sent them an answer. The answer was a jar of windflower. I did not know they would use it on him. I thought it would frighten him into silence. It did not. You killed him. I made the poison, child. I did not lift the cup. The Duke stepped between them. Who paid you? For me. For the 7. Lautner smiled. It was the smile of a man who has lived long enough to know that what comes next does not matter. You already know, Your Grace. Say his name. It will not save you. Say his name. Lautner reached, slowly, into a drawer at the side of the table. The Duke's hand moved to his sword. Lautner pulled out a small wooden box. He set it on the table. He opened it. Inside were 7 seals. Wax impressions, kept as records. Each one a different family crest. 6 of the families were already broken in their direct line. The 7th seal was Reinhardt, and under the 7 seals was an 8th piece of wax. Older, a different seal, a crown above a wolf's head. The Duke went very pale. That is not the king's mark. No, Your Grace. It is his brother's. Prince Wilhelm, the king's younger brother, a man who had been passed over for the throne when their father died, because Wilhelm had been 10 and his brother had been 22. A man who had spent 30 years smiling at every banquet and making every toast and bowing at every funeral. Why? Because, Your Grace, the king has no son. The king is 48 and has buried 3 wives without a child. And the 7 men he would have named to the Regency Council, the 7 men who would have ruled after him on behalf of his chosen heir, are 6 in their graves and 1 standing in this tower. And after I am dead, after you are dead, Your Grace, the king names the only man left to him. And the only man left to him is his brother. The Duke stood very still. Then he reached down and he picked up the 8th seal. He closed his hand around it. He looked at the old man. You will write a confession. You will sign it. You will name him. You will name every man who carried his letters. And then I will decide whether you live. I will write it, Your Grace. I have been waiting 11 years for someone to ask. The Duke turned to Mira. She was still standing in the doorway. She had not moved. The basket was still in her hand. Come here, girl. She came. He pressed the seal into her hand. You hold this. Not me. You. Because if I fall on the road between here and the king's chamber, you will carry it the rest of the way. Do you understand? Yes, Your Grace. Then we ride at dawn. Prince Wilhelm did not run. That was the strange thing. When the Duke arrived at the king's palace 4 days later, with Master Lautner's confession in a sealed letter and the 7 wax impressions in a wooden box and a scullery maid named Mira walking 3 steps behind him, the prince did not run. He met them in the king's great hall. He stood at his brother's right hand, smiling the same smile he had smiled for 30 years. And when the Duke laid the box on the table and opened it and turned the 8th seal so the king could see it, Prince Wilhelm did not deny it. He did not weep. He did not beg. He looked at his brother and he said very quietly, I would have been a good king. The king said nothing. For a long time he said nothing. And then he looked at the Duke. And then he looked, past the Duke, at the thin girl with the straw-colored hair standing 3 steps back. This is the one. Yes, sire. aMaid. aMaid, sire. The king nodded slowly. He turned to his brother. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. He simply said, Take him. And the guards took him. Prince Wilhelm was not executed. The king could not bring himself to it. His brother was taken to a fortress in the far north and locked in a room with 1 window and 1 bed and 1 chair, and he lived there for 11 years, and when he died of a real fever, alone in winter, no one in the court spoke of it for a month. The 7 families. The 6 that had been broken. The king did what he could. He restored their lands. He named their daughters and their cousins to seats they had been denied. He sent letters to widows, and the letters were not the empty letters a king usually sends, because the king was an old man now and he understood, finally, what had been taken from him. But that is the part of the story the official histories did record. You can find it in books. The poisons, the prince, the fortress in the north, the letters to the widows. What the histories do not record is what happened to Mira. She returned to the duchy with the Duke. She did not return as a scullery maid. The Duke gave her a small house at the edge of the eastern garden. He gave her a garden of her own. He paid for 2 apprentices and 3 guards. And he named her mistress of the still room. It was not a title that had existed in the household before. He invented it for her. She was 19 years old. The cook was not hanged. Mira asked for her life. The Duke gave it. The cook spent the rest of her days in the same kitchen, washing the same pots Mira had once washed, and she did not speak to Mira when their paths crossed in the courtyard, but she did not speak ill of her either. Heinrich was hanged. There was no help for it. Otto was hanged. The Duke's son came home from school. He was 16. He met Mira in the Eastern Garden one afternoon and bowed to her, because his father had told him to, and she did not know what to do with a bow from a boy who would one day be a duke, so she curtsied so deep her knees touched the grass. He laughed. She laughed. After that they were friends. Years later, when that boy was a man and his father was old, he would say to anyone who asked that the woman who tended his father's garden had saved his family from a darkness he could not name. He would not say her name. He had been told not to. Mira lived to be 68. She married a quiet man who kept bees. She had 3 children. The oldest was a girl. The girl was named for Myra's mother, not for Mira. In the last year of her life, when she was very thin and the Eastern Garden had grown wild because she could no longer tend it, the Duke's grandson came to visit her. He was a young man then. He sat with her by the fire. He asked her, in the way young men ask old women, what was the bravest thing she had ever done. She thought about it. She said, "I knocked a spoon out of a man's hand." He waited for more. There was no more. A spoon. A scream. A blade against the neck. A word spoken with a cheek pressed to stone. That was the bravest thing. And the most powerful man in the duchy, the man who had buried his father and his uncle and 6 friends without ever knowing why, would say, until the day he died, that the most overlooked person in his household had been the only one in the room who could see. The rest of them had looked at the food. She had smelled the truth.